The 130th Psalm. I cry out to you from the depths, Lord. My Lord, listen to my voice. Let your ears pay close attention to my request for mercy. If you keep track of sins, Lord, my Lord, who would stand a chance? But forgiveness is with you. That's why you are honored. I hope, Lord. My whole being hopes, and I wait for God's promise. My whole being waits for my Lord, more than the night watch waits for morning. Yes, more than the night watch waits for morning. Israel, wait for the Lord, because faithful love is with the Lord, because great redemption is with our God. God is the one who will redeem us from all our sin. I am looking at a scripture today that sort of speaks to the moment in time of being in the middle of January in the Northern Hemisphere, the end of January, beginning of February in the Northern Hemisphere. The light, of course, has already started. It's decreased all the way down to its full point, and it's already started to come back. But those of us who experience effects to our mental health from that light are still very much in the throes of what affects us, of what dampens our mood or takes us down, or sometimes can just cause us not to really feel like getting out of bed. So I'm not preaching this week, so I thought I would pick a text that kind of spoke to that. I will say that my text was also chosen because one thing that came up a lot this week was waiting. It just kept coming up over and over, and I can think of nothing more waiting related than the way people who experience seasonal affective disorder have to get through the winter months when it is dark and darker than they need it to be, and all of that's affecting them. So when the psalm began with, "Out of the depths I cry unto you," I thought that was a pretty good psalm to start with today. That's a pretty good one to start with today. For me, one of the more frustrating things about this time of year and the way I feel is that I'm not usually depressed. I deal with anxiety, but not usually, and for the most part, not depression. But that is what comes for me with the colder, darker weather. And so, I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but I do a lot because my anxiety and my creativity are connected to each other. And so when I'm working on living with my oddities of my mind the way it is, there's some things that are stressful and there's some benefits that come out of it. But what happens this time of year is that I have creative, amazing thoughts and all sorts of ways I could get started with them. But I have no, gumption. I don't want it to sound like I'm lazy, because that's not it. And I don't think that about myself. It's just that I can't get the motion started and all together. And it's so frustrating because here it's the beginning of a year. There's all sorts of reasons to get up and get into the world and to get excited and doing things. And then there's one rather large reason not to. It's because I just can't overcome the way I feel. And I know I am not the only one out here dealing with that. And I've talked to people this week who are in that space. And so this is just a shout out to all of us who are dealing with that. So our psalm today says, "Out of the depths I cry to you, my Lord, listen to my voice. Now, I know God's listening, you know God's listening, but wow, it doesn't always feel like it. Sometimes it is very hard to feel it. So the psalmist just reminds us as well, that God hears us when we cry out, but it's also important to say, God, make sure you're listening. I know you are, but please help me know that. Help me know that better. Let your ears pay close attention to my request for mercy. And then I like that for a moment, the psalmist just deals with sin for just a second. I mentioned earlier that I don't want to describe how I'm feeling as lazy or as not wanting to, or not wanting to get up and do the things I need to do and that sort of thing. Because I do think that one aspect of mental illness and struggles like this has been to blame it on people. And it's been for people to blame it on themselves too. And so this time of year can feel like lots of guilt. And it's really important for those of us who live with these things to learn to separate sin and intent from the uncomfortable feelings and the painful feelings that we get with the depression or with seasonal affective disorder. And one way I think to do that is to go back to the psalmist and to remember, I love what he says here, if you kept track of sins, Lord, my Lord, who would stand a chance? Because what he's saying is, Lord, you don't keep track of sins. You're not holding that against me. It doesn't continue to exist in a way that will spring up later and get me. And those are all things I think that if they get much time in our hearts and souls, they can do damage to anybody, but especially when we're dealing with this time of year and all that it brings. Now, if you are not the kind of person who's affected by the light change, you might think, oh, well, this doodle is not for me. But I submit that there are elements to this scripture and to this time of thinking and pondering that might be useful anyway. You may know somebody who is going through this, or you may find yourself at a time when, in spite of the fact that you know that there is forgiveness, in spite of the fact that you know that God has made promises to you that God will keep, you might not be feeling it. And you can store this up for those times. You can store up the scripture and store up the visual images we have with it for those times. I remember once when I was trying to, this was before I was diagnosed, and I was trying to describe for myself more than for anybody else how I was feeling, what I was feeling, and I was drawing. And I remember the use of a spiral shape in what I was drawing. And I was thinking about that today. Did I want to use a spiral? And I thought no, because that's why I used circles instead. I think spiral sometimes for people only goes one way or the other. And I know for me at the time, I was thinking of a tornado. Sort of a cross between a black hole and a tornado, and that was kind of the depth of what I was feeling. And I'm not feeling that today or this season, because I have done a lot of work and God has done a lot of healing, and I have friends and family who understand me. And so that's not really where I am, but if it is, it can help to draw that spiral and to work on putting colors and shapes into that spiral, even if it's in the negative space. Sometimes when you draw, you leave spaces blank. And if you draw a spiral, you can leave a blank background and let that be for what you don't really quite know yet, for what you don't understand, and for where healing may be that you haven't imagined yet. Because I know at that point in my life, I certainly had not imagined the kind of wholeness that God had in store for me. I don't want to say healing like there was this one big moment when I stopped feeling difficult feelings or stopped running into problems with my brain chemical pumps or, something like that. But there was a moment when I stopped blaming it on myself. And there was a moment when I accepted that my creativity and my frustration come from the same place in my brain, and that I was going to need to learn to live with both. And there are still moments when I realize I'm getting the hang of it. There are other moments when I'm like, whoa, flat on my face with that one. And that's okay too. That's the way this goes. It is not easy. It is not easy. Now you might notice what I'm going for here, this effect, is kind of steps. Down in, but also back out. So rather than a spiral that I think of as just kind of going down the page, or down into the center, I'm putting steps here. Because we do come and go from these moments. We go down into them, but we also come up out of them. And so I think about a stile, the way people used to put stiles in fences and pasture fields. And you climb up one side and down the other, and you are suddenly in a different place. And that, I think, is very true as we sort of wait on God's healing in our lives, and we wait on wholeness to come to us in new forms and new ways. Waiting sometimes feels synonymous with not doing anything. And it really isn't, and that really isn't what God's talking about. So whatever it is we're working on, we may have to wait. And in that waiting, we can do other things. You can talk to the people around you. You can find out more about them, kind of pull out of yourself a little bit. And if that's not accessible, you can just sit there and think about praying for them. Just kind of lifting them up to God, or just kind of noticing the world around you. If you notice the sights and sounds and everything that are going on around you, that's a wonderful thing to help us in that time of waiting. Because the world around us is very healing. There's lots of power in that God has invested in this good creation. So noticing the birds, noticing the trees, feeling the wind on your face, the rain or the snow or whatever weather you happen to be dealing with. Just being aware of it and paying attention to it. How high up is the sun in the sky, or how close to sunset, or can you see the stars? All of those things help us to wait. It's hard to pick on colors this time of year because the mood would definitely be gray and blue and brown. But I don't think that's very expressive of really what I'm thinking about with waiting. I think waiting is so much more vibrant. I'm going to start it with green here. I'm going to start with some green in this space. And this is going to be sort of my outer edge and my hope for springtime out here on the outer edge. I'm liking this green. It's going on really well. I think a lot about plants and compost this time of year. It's almost Lent, I once read a book by Donna Shaper called Calmly Plotting the Resurrection, and she drew the line for me between Lent and compost, and I've never forgotten it. I think sometimes we try to explain the difficult or the bad things that happen in our life, and I'm not sure that we're supposed to really figure all of them out and be able to say, oh, God did this one, God intended this, and this was a result of human sin or whatever. So much as we're supposed to realize that whatever seems wasted or thrown away or left over at the end of the day, and you put it into your compost barrel, if you think about cooking, and save it up and let it do its thing, and it's stinky. Oh my goodness, it can get so stinky. And it's not pretty, it's not elegant, but what it is life. It's life happening there. And that's the way God works with our lives too. That the things that we think of as being, oh, I'm just going to have to endure this, it's so terrible, or this is really, really, a bad thing, a consequence I've brought into my life. I just got to tolerate it and things will be better when it's all over with. But if at the end of the day, we can take those things and give them to God, just like we put our eggshells and our vegetable peelings into the composter. If we can do that, then God can really transform them in much the same way that all of that garbage that we would normally throw out becomes the soil. But I think that's the lesson of compost for Lent, is that those beautiful daffodils and tulips and all the things we enjoy so much in the spring, and the sunshine and the way the plants make use of that sunshine to rise in our life at a time when we really need it, because the sun starts coming back and starts raising us up as well. All of those things grow from compost. They grow from the soil, and they don't grow terribly well without it. When the ground gets old and tired and it's had too many things planted in it and not enough return to it, it's not very productive soil anymore. I love daffodils. They always come up right around my birthday too. So if you ever see my birthday posts on Facebook or anything, you will see lots of daffodils in them, because they always come up right at the same time. Talk about out of the depths. People who plant bulbs plant them in the time of year when everything's going away. It's all sort of settling in for the winter and burrowing down and getting cozy, and the landscape begins to look kind of bleak. But I think of those people who look at that time of year as it's coming on, and they take those bulbs and they drop them down into the ground, and they hope the squirrels won't eat them, or the deer won't eat them. The squirrels dig the bulbs up sometimes, and that can be very frustrating. And so they're looking ahead, though, because when the sun comes back and when the ground has soaked up as much wonderful nitrogen as it can from whatever snow we get, those bulbs will come back up, and there will be color and life in our world again. And our winter of waiting will turn into a spring with all kinds of life and creativity going on around us. Now, we may not feel better immediately. It may be a long haul before we feel better. And we know that. If we've been living with this for any time at all, we know that it may take a while, and that sometimes having your energy come back up is pretty not so comfortable either, but we'll make it, because the promise of God is wholeness in this life and the next. Ways to live and to find the strength in who we are. Just continuing on with these bright colors here. I notice I'm thinking about the rhythm of going up and down at a time when my body is really asking to stay very, very still. And I think it's important that we not be too critical of our bodies. And I know it's frustrating when they don't want to get up when we want them to. But I do think it's important as we journey through this time to come back to those things that do help us wait. And I mentioned earlier going out in nature. That's one thing I know I did a lot during the pandemic, was to go sit on the back porch and just enjoy that. And I love when I can remember to do that. I know in winter it's a lot harder to to do unless you're in a warmer area. Where we are, we get warm days, so you can find a day when you can go out, even if you can't go all the time. So that's really nice, and it's good to absorb the light and all that. But you don't have to push yourself to be real active. You can just sit in the light. What do you think of when you think of out of the depths? Out of the depths, I cry to you. Is it like despair? Is it like an actual situation of being trapped or having fallen, something like that, where you would actually be deep or low? Some ways it sounds like what Jonah might have said, from being down deep in the ocean. Out of the depths, I cry to you. I know it is, as I'm doing this, as I'm coloring on this one, it is the week or the month when people are aware of mental illness, and so it's part of why I'm doing this today, but also part of why I wanted to say this, which is that what we know about our own mental illness before we're diagnosed and what we know about it after, neither one of those is wrong. Now, one can be more medically accurate than the other, but our experience is still valid. And one of the things I've noticed is a lot of times we talk, and I do this a lot because I talk from a perspective of one who's been diagnosed and who's had some success with some different responses to that and treatments. And it's kind of, it's not easy to forget, but it is common to not go back and mention what it felt like before. And part of that is because I don't, that's not where I am now, and I don't necessarily want to go back there. But I do remember one thing that I think is really important that we all remember about not being diagnosed yet, which is that if you are down and low and physically feeling exhausted or pain this time of year and you don't know why, there is genuine frustration in that. And there is a real need to just cry out and say, I don't want to wait. I don't want to sit around here in this place and just feel like this. Something is wrong. And that's true. Something is not going right. Something is wrong. And so I just want to say that, while I know this time of year, I know what's wrong, and therefore I can respond by, reminding myself that I have strategies and that kind of thing. I also know that if what you're feeling and what you're hearing is something is wrong, then that's a cry for help. It's like, out of the depths, I cry to you, oh God. And that's a good thing to be able to do if it doesn't feel like it. And it doesn't necessarily feel like you're being heard, I know. But we know a lot more about those things than we used to, and not everything you try will work. Not everyone you go to will be helpful. But it can happen, and it is important to keep on trying, to keep going back for help until someone hears what's really going on with you, because you don't need to be living fully under the weight of that. Even though after diagnosis we do live with that disability or that disorder or whatever it is, we live with it, but we live with it in a whole new way, and there's a whole new relationship to it. So it's not the same thing. And I just want to honor that pre-diagnosis can be very, very frustrating. And it can feel like, well, everyone else is getting help for these things, but why can I not? And I get that. I get that. I think a lot of us do. I'm closing in on these colors here, and now I really am going to let myself go with the blue and get some darkness in there, because, you know, we kind of make darkness the villain, but the darkness in our world that God created there is put there to help us rest. And yeah, some of us want to hibernate. That is very true. Some of us just want to take that all the way and hibernate. And we can't always. It doesn't work in our lifestyles. So we got to remember, though, that need for rest is real. And that rest can also mean letting ourselves not be so high achieving or so getting such ambitious goals this time of year, but to just wait. To just wait and to rest and to let our bodies take a moment to get back into that place where they can thrive again. On the other hand, it's also, you know, that's also the benefit of having the light and the bright colors in there. There are things that will help lighten these times, and it's important to have those in our lives as well. There's a lot of ways scripture can play a role in our life, and today I've gone definitely more devotionally and more spiritual, sort of spiritually aligning ourselves and centering ourselves. A lot of times I'll go more the scholarly route with it because I like to think critically about things like this. But the Psalms especially lend themselves to devotional time and to worship. Because that's what they were written for, honestly. That's exactly why they were written. The one today, definitely a deep prayer out of personal experience, but also a community prayer for memory and a song of praise, remembering what God has done and acknowledging that for the future. And committing ourselves again to that waiting process. Because the promise, the hope, is real. Faithfulness of God will outlast the darkness or the difficulty or the depression or the long, slow, you know, a lot of times we talk about the long nights, but I seriously, with seasonal affective disorder, I think it's more a question of long mornings. I have the hardest time in the morning. Oh, this is fun too. I forgot to mention this. You can also, when you are putting lines in, you can put some lines in places where you maybe want a little more detail. And that's a lot of fun. I always like to put dots in that way. We talked about the sun on Sunday. We talked about sunrise and sunset with the little kids. And I got thinking, because I was trying to draw one, and I was trying to decide whether to use as my graphic for the children's sermon a sunrise or a sunset. And then I realized, as I looked at clip art and different ideas to get an idea for the shape I wanted, I can't tell one from the other. And I got to thinking, well, of course, you can't tell if it's a sunrise or a sunset from a picture unless you know where the person was standing. I haven't done anything with that yet, but I think it's kind of cool to put in place as well. So where would we be without those folks who have been through it before us? And like the psalmist can say, hey, just remember, out of the depths, my friend, I cry unto the Lord. All right, I think that's got it. And we today... Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It's just like this needs something. know it's a little funky looking, but I'm thinking of those daffodils I mentioned earlier. There we go. Okay. So today we were looking at Psalm 130, and I am Lisa Caldwell Rice, one of the co-pastors at First Christian Church in Berea, Kentucky, and I have been glad to share this with you today